The sun never really sets on the Martian Badlands, it just hovers like a sullen eye, casting long rusty shadows over the craggy terrain. Jax adjusted his goggles against the harsh glare as he piloted his battered hover truck over the dunes, the vehicle's engine coughing and sputtering like an old smoker. The trip had been routine enough, another scrap run for parts no one else would bother with, until the horizon rippled in a way that wasn't heat. Jax squinted. Something big gleamed in the distance, just a shimmer at first, but soon revealing itself to be the wreckage of a craft unlike anything he'd ever seen. As he drew closer, his pulse quickened. This wasn't some Martian skimmer or corporate drone. This was alien. His hover truck came to a complaining halt a few meters from the crash site. The hull of the craft had sheared apart like paper, its metallic surface crumpled in unnatural ways. Jax stepped out, boots crunching on the gritty sand. Even in the thin air, the acrid scent of burned metal and scorched atmosphere lingered. He should have been thinking about what the authorities would do if they found him here. Poaching salvage from an unknown alien race could land him in more trouble than he could talk his way out of. But curiosity won out. It always did. Yao approached the ship cautiously, his pulse hammering. No movement, no sound. The wind howled through a gash in the hull, carrying with it a faint, almost electric hum. Peering inside, he spotted shards of translucent panels, some kind of control, console smashed beyond recognition. His gaze shifted to a large, crumpled form wedged against what looked like a bulkhead. For a moment, his mind didn't register what he was seeing. It wasn't a piece of the ship. It was alive. The creature was massive, its long body sprawled, awkwardly in a tangled heap. Its scales, if they were scales, looked soft, more like a living pearl than armor. Long, sinuous limbs lay twisted and motionless, and its wings, delicate as frost on a window pane, were crumpled beneath its weight. Its head, broad and reptilian, rested on the floor at an unnatural angle. The dragon's eyes were closed, its mouth slightly open, revealing rows of teeth that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Jax froze, caught between awe and panic. This creature, this alien dragon, was like nothing he'd ever imagined, even in his wildest dives into smuggled off-world broadcasts. The dragon didn't move. It was clearly alive, though. The shallow rise and fall of its chest proved that much. But it wasn't breathing right. Its sides hitched as if each breath was a battle. A faint, low whine, almost like a mechanical whir, accompanied each exhale. Jax's first thought was to turn back. He wasn't equipped to deal with this. He didn't even know if the creature was dangerous. But then he noticed a faint trail of pale blue fluid, like blood, but luminous, dribbling from a deep gash along its flank. It was hurt. Badly. Shit, Jax muttered under his breath. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even particularly brave. But he was a mechanic, and mechanics fix things, even things that seemed beyond fixing. He glanced back at his truck. He had some basic medical supplies and tools stashed behind the driver's seat. Nothing fancy, but better than nothing. If the creature stayed here, it was as good as dead. And if it died, whatever this thing was, he'd be responsible. No one else was around. Jax squared his shoulders. All right, he said aloud, mostly to convince himself. Let's get you out of here. Approaching slowly, he took note of the injuries. Deep lacerations on its legs and sides. One wing looked shredded, the other bent. The creature's pale scales shifted faintly, reflecting the red sand like a pool of oil. It was heavy, far heavier than anything he'd dealt with before, but he wasn't going to leave it. Jax rigged a makeshift sling from tarps and cables in his truck, wrapping them gently around the creature's midsection and hooking them to the truck's lifting arm. The creature didn't stir. The truck groaned as he hauled the dragon's limp form into the cargo bed. He was careful, but it was still a clumsy operation. When he finally secured the creature, he was drenched in sweat and his hands trembled. Okay, big guy, Jax said, trying to sound reassuring. Let's get you somewhere safe. The hover truck's engine sputtered as Jax fired it up, the vehicle rocking slightly under the added weight. Jax glanced back at the dragon as he steered toward the distant safety of the old mining outpost he called home. It didn't look good. Those breaths were coming slower now, and the glow of its wounds seemed dimmer. Jax had no idea what he'd gotten himself into. He wasn't sure if the dragon would make it through the trip. Hell, he wasn't even sure he'd make it back to the outpost without his rickety truck falling apart under the load. All he knew was that he had to try. The old hover truck bucked and groaned as it climbed the rocky trail, each jolt threatening to send the cargo tumbling. Jax kept a white-knuckle grip on the controls, stealing quick glances into the back. The alien dragon, Cyrex as he'd taken to calling it, lay limp in the bed, bound by a network of makeshift straps and reinforced tarps. Its translucent, pearl-like scales were no longer as radiant as they had been, the shimmer dulled by blood-like fluids oozing from deep wounds. Jax muttered to himself, "If this thing doesn't kill me when it wakes up, the bandits sure will." The Martian Badlands were no friendlier than they were desolate. The dragon's presence had made an already dangerous route infinitely more precarious. Word traveled fast out here, even in the middle of nowhere. Bandits would pick up the scent soon enough, and no scrappy mechanic with a busted truck and a battered plasma cutter was going to hold them off for long. He needed to get Cyrex somewhere safe, and fast. The terrain flattened into a cracked expanse of salt pans, the dry air stinging Jax's nose and throat. The faint whine of the hover truck's engine was accompanied by a sound that hadn't been there before. A shallow, uneven hiss. It was coming from the cargo bed. Cyrex's breathing had grown louder, more ragged, as if the effort of staying alive was draining the creature's strength. It stirred slightly, a single taloned foot scraping against the truck bed's edge. Jax felt a sudden stab of worry. He had no idea if the dragon was improving or slipping closer to death. As the truck rattled onward, Jax began to talk. Not because he expected an answer, but because the silence was suffocating. He found himself explaining what he was doing, detailing his every move as if the dragon might somehow understand. "All right, we're about an hour out from the next settlement," he said, glancing in the rearview screen. "Just gotta get over this ridge and then I can patch you up properly. You're gonna be fine. Or at least you're gonna be less not fine." It was a weak reassurance, but he needed it as much as Cyrex did. Maybe more. The ridge came into view. A jagged wall of rock that looked like a row of broken teeth. Jax knew the path, a narrow trail carved by decades of wind and the occasional vehicle. The problem was, the ridge also made a perfect spot for an ambush. He slowed the truck, eyes scanning the horizon, and kept a hand near the plasma cutter, on the seat beside him. As he crested the ridge, his stomach sank. 3 skimmers waited below, their sleek, angular forms partially hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Bandits. He recognized the gang's emblem painted on their vehicles, a crude skull with a jagged line bisecting it. They hadn't spotted him yet, but that wouldn't last long. The skimmers were fast, much faster than his lumbering hover truck, and if they saw what he was hauling, they'd follow him until his engine gave out. He eased off the accelerator and considered his options. He could turn back, find another route, but that would cost time Cyrex didn't have. He could try to bluff his way through, claiming the cargo was just scrap, but even if they bought it, they'd still want a cut. Worst case, they'd just take the truck and leave him stranded. Jax's pulse quickened. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Before he could decide, the truck jolted, hard. Jax's head snapped around. Cyrex had moved, or at least twitched, its long tail catching the edge of the truck bed. The movement seemed sluggish, but it was movement nonetheless. For the first time, Jax felt a flicker of hope. If Cyrex could move, even slightly, it might have a chance. That hope was tempered by a fresh wave of urgency. If the dragon was stirring, it meant he didn't have much time before it might wake fully. And if it woke up scared or hurt, Jax didn't know what it might do. He turned his attention back to the ridge. The bandits were still there, but now one of the skimmers had started to drift out from behind the rocks. They must have seen him, or at least the dust trail his truck kicked up. Jax took a deep breath. "All right, big guy," he muttered to the dragon. "If you can hear me, now would be a great time to show me some of that alien magic you've got stored away." He doubted the creature could understand a word he was saying, but somehow, talking made the situation feel less desperate. With his heart pounding, Jax pressed the accelerator. The hover truck surged forward, roaring down the ridge as the bandit's skimmers sprang into pursuit. Jax gritted his teeth and leaned into the controls. His truck wasn't fast, but it was sturdy, and he knew how to push it past its limits. The bandits closed the gap quickly, their skimmers weaving effortlessly across the uneven terrain. Jax swerved, dodging rocks and ridges, his engine screaming in protest. He glanced back again. Cyrex had shifted slightly, its massive frame shuddering with each jolt of the truck. Its breathing sounded sharper, almost like a growl. Whether that was a good sign or a bad one, Jax didn't have time to figure out. A sharp crack split the air. Plasma fire. The bandits were firing warning shots now, bright streaks of energy cutting through the thin Martian atmosphere. One blast hit a boulder ahead of Jax, sending shards of rock flying. He winced, gripping the controls tighter. "Just hold on," he shouted, as much to himself as to Cyrex. "We're almost there." Almost where, though? Jax didn't have a plan beyond getting out of immediate danger. His mind raced. The old mining outpost was still a ways off, and his truck's engine wasn't going to hold up under this kind of strain for long. He had to think of something, some way to lose the bandits. Then it hit him. The salt flats. He'd avoided them earlier because of the risk. The thin crust of salt could give way, revealing deep sinkholes that could swallow a vehicle whole. But that risk might work to his advantage. The bandits wouldn't expect anyone to take such a dangerous route, and if he could navigate it carefully, he might just lose them. He veered sharply toward the flats, the truck lurching as it left the rocky trail. The salt flats stretched out before him, a dazzling expanse of white that shimmered under the relentless Martian sun. As he hit the edge, the hover truck's sensors shrieked warnings about unstable ground. He ignored them. Behind him, the bandits hesitated. The lead skimmer stopped, its pilot clearly debating whether to follow. Jax held his breath. If they gave up now, he might actually make it out of this in one piece. For a long, tense moment, the bandits lingered at the edge of the flats. Then, one by one, the skimmers peeled off, retreating back toward the ridge. Jax let out a shaky breath. He had gambled and won. For now, as the truck limped across the flats, Cyrex let out a faint sound, something halfway between a growl and a sigh. Jax glanced back. The dragon's massive body was still, but its breathing was steadier, more rhythmic. It wasn't much, but it was something. He turned back to the horizon, a flicker of hope lighting up his exhaustion. "Hang in there, big guy," Jax murmured. "We're not done yet." The mining outpost clung to the edge of a rocky plateau, half buried beneath layers of Martian dust. It had been abandoned for years, left to the whistling winds and creeping dunes. Jax had stumbled across it on a scrap run years back and claimed it as his hideout ever since. He knew the narrow access tunnels and reinforced shelters by heart, and they'd become his sanctuary in a lawless world. Now, as the hover truck sputtered to a halt in the outpost's shadow, he prayed it would be enough to protect both him and Cyrex. Jax jumped out, coughing on the ever-present red dust. He moved quickly, unstrapping the dragon's limp form from the truck bed. Cyrex's breathing was steadier, but its body was still unresponsive. With a grunt, Jax hauled the massive creature onto a makeshift sled, a scavenged mining cart he'd repurposed for carrying heavy machinery, and dragged it toward one of the outpost's cavernous storage bays. The bay was cool and dark, the air stale but bearable. Jax flipped a few switches on the old control panel, coaxing dim lights and an ancient life support system into action. The bay's bulkhead sealed with a heavy clang, cutting off the Martian wind. For the first time in hours, Jax exhaled and allowed himself to think beyond survival. He examined the dragon more closely under the faint, flickering lights. The injuries were bad. Deep cuts along the limbs, fractures in what Jax had assumed were bones, but now seemed more like flexible, crystalline structures. The bioluminescent patterns on its scales, once vivid, had faded into faint glimmers. Jax set to work with what little he had: a soldering iron, synthetic skin patches, a field plasma welder. He didn't know if these tools would help, but they were all he had. The dragon's physiology was unlike anything he'd encountered. Every touch revealed something new. A second set of flexible rib-like structures beneath the primary frame. A faint pulse of light that flickered in time with its shallow breaths. It wasn't until the second day of care that something truly strange happened. While reapplying a patch to the creature's side, Jax noticed a subtle glow emanating from within one of its wounds. It wasn't blood or any biological process he recognized. It was faintly mechanical, tiny filaments of light, threading through the wound like glowing veins. At first, Jax thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as he stared closer, he saw the pattern shifting, aligning, like some sort of self-repair mechanism. His pulse quickened. "What the hell are you?" he whispered. Cyrex shifted just barely. A faint sound, almost like a sigh, came from deep within its throat. Jax leaned in. He felt a strange warmth against his hand, a brief pulse of energy that wasn't heat. Exactly. It was something else, something alive. The glow beneath the scales flickered as though responding to his presence. The next morning, Jax found an unexpected visitor in the outpost. Slumped against the bulkhead near the entrance was a figure alien in appearance, its breathing labored. It was smaller than Cyrex, with a similar pale bioluminescent skin but in a duller shade. One of its limbs hung at an awkward angle, and it clutched a small, luminous device in its hand. Jax approached cautiously, weapon in hand, but the alien's voice, thin and wavering, stopped him cold. "You helped Cyrex?" The words were stilted, heavy with an accent Jax didn't recognize, but they were clear enough. Jax froze. "You can talk?" The alien nodded weakly. "Not for long. Listen." Over the next few minutes, Jax learned that Cyrex wasn't just a creature. It was something far more complex, something created. Cyrex was a biomechanical being, a fusion of organic life and advanced technology from a civilization so far removed from humanity's understanding that even this explanation felt like a crude oversimplification. The alien described Cyrex as a guardian, a protector of its kind who had been damaged in a failed attempt to shield a fleeing group from pursuers. Jax blinked. "You mean Cyrex was built? Like a machine?" "No," the alien rasped. "Not just built, born, and made. Together. Its body can heal, but it needs the right energy flow, disrupted now. Without alignment, Cyrex will never move again." Jax knelt beside the alien, his mind spinning. "What do you mean by alignment? How do I fix it?" The alien handed him the glowing device. "This will guide you, but too weak to finish. You must improvise." The alien's head drooped. Jax reached out to steady it, but the faint light in its body faded. It slumped forward, lifeless. Jax stared at the device in his hands. The strange, crystalline object pulsed with a faint, irregular light. He turned it over, studying its shape. It looked almost like a key, but with branching filaments that seemed to shift as he moved it. Whatever it was alien technology far beyond his understanding. He glanced back at Cyrex, still lying motionless in the cart. "All right," Jax muttered. "You're not just some big lizard, are you? Let's see if I can get your alignment back." He spent the next several hours tinkering, connecting the glowing device to the few power cells he had on hand. His tools were crude, and his knowledge even cruder, but his mechanics instincts told him that the patterns on the device mattered. It wasn't just about fixing a broken part. It was about restoring the flow of energy, reconnecting circuits that weren't circuits in the traditional sense. It was like working on a living machine, one that responded to intention as much as action. As the makeshift rig began to hum, Cyrex's body twitched. The glow in its scales brightened, flickering like a signal trying to lock on. Jax watched in awe as the light spread, illuminating the creature's body from within. Its breathing grew more regular, and for the first time Jax saw one of its limbs move, a faint tentative motion as if testing its own strength. It was working. The hum of the alien device grew steadier, its filaments intertwining in a complex dance of light and motion. Jack sat back on his heels, watching in awe as the glow spread across Cyrex's body, illuminating each translucent scale. For days, he had fought to keep the dragon alive, patching its wounds with human tools and sheer determination. Now the restoration device, this alien key, was doing what he could not. It was bringing Cyrex back to life. With a shuddering gasp, the dragon's head lifted. Its eyes, opaque and lifeless before, glimmered faintly, their depths swirling with a soft inner light. Jax froze. The moment he'd both dreaded and hoped for had arrived. The creature was waking up. "Easy there," Jax murmured, hands raised cautiously. "You're all right, just take it slow." Cyrex's gaze locked on him, unblinking. For a long moment they stared at each other, one human, one alien, neither moving. Then, slowly, Cyrex shifted. The movement was halting and uncoordinated. At first, but it was unmistakable. The dragon's limbs, once limp and lifeless, found purchase on the ground. Its wings, tattered but intact, twitched. The glow beneath its scales brightened, casting rippling patterns of light across the walls. "You're standing," Jack said softly, more to himself than the creature. "You're actually standing." Cyrex seemed to test its balance, leaning, one way then another. The faint hum of the device pulsing through its frame created a rhythm, a resonance as if it were syncing to an internal signal. Jax had no idea if the dragon was recovering its memories, its strength, or even its purpose, but he knew one thing for sure. It was alive again. The moment of calm didn't last. A distant rumble reverberated through the mining outpost's walls. Jax's heart sank. He had hoped the bandits had given up after the chase, but that hope was shattered as the rumble grew louder. They had tracked him here, and this time they wouldn't leave empty-handed. "Damn it," Jax muttered, running to the control panel. The outpost's ancient sensors confirmed what his gut already knew. Multiple skimmers were inbound and they weren't stopping for a friendly chat. He turned to Cyrex, who now stood fully upright. The dragon's head tilted slightly, as if sensing the threat. The glow of its scales shifted, brightening to a sharp, piercing luminescence. For a fleeting moment, Jax thought he saw the hint of intelligence in those glowing eyes, a glimmer of awareness, of understanding. "Look, I don't know if you can hear me," Jax said, grabbing his plasma cutter and a makeshift shield. "But we've got company. If you've got any tricks up your sleeve, now's the time." The outer bulkhead trembled as the bandit skimmers roared into the open bay. Jax braced himself, raising his cutter as the first of the gang stepped through. The bandits were armed to the teeth, their crude armor and scavenged weapons glinting in the flickering light. Their leader, a hulking brute with a bionic arm, sneered as he caught sight of Cyrex. "Well, what do we have here?" The leader said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Looks like our mechanic friend's been hiding him. Treasure." Jack stepped forward, blocking their path to the dragon. "Back off, you have no idea what you're messing with." The leader's laugh was harsh. "You think you can stop us? That thing's worth more than your life, boy." The bandits surged forward. Jax raised his plasma cutter, preparing for a hopeless fight, but before the first shot was fired, a deafening roar echoed through the bay. The sound was unlike anything Jax had ever heard, a low, resonant bellow that vibrated deep in his chest. Cyrex stepped forward, wings spreading wide despite their tattered state. The glow of its scales blazed, filling the room with a dazzling brilliance. The bandits froze. Even the leader took a step back. Cyrex's gaze swept across them, unyielding and intense. It didn't attack. Didn't need to. The sheer presence of the fully awakened dragon was enough. One of the bandits dropped his weapon and bolted. Another followed. Within moments, the entire gang was scrambling back to their skimmers, leaving the outpost in chaos. The roar of their engines faded into the distance, and then they were gone. Jax lowered his plasma cutter, his heart pounding. "Well," he said, his voice shaky. "That's one way to clear a room." Cyrex turned its gaze to Jax. The dragon's posture had shifted, Less defensive, more deliberate, it took a step closer, lowering its massive head until it was nearly at eye level with him. Jack stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. But then, slowly, the dragon's head dipped, almost like a bow. It held the position for a moment, before straightening again. "Are you?" Jax hesitated. "Are you thanking me?" The dragon made no sound, but the light in its scales pulsed once, a soft rhythmic glow that felt almost like a heartbeat. Jax didn't know if it was a yes or a goodbye. Maybe both. Before he could say another word, Cyrex moved. The dragon's wings unfolded fully, and with a single powerful beat it launched into the air. Dust and debris swirled as it soared out of the bay into the thin Martian atmosphere. Jack shielded his eyes against the light and the wind, watching as the creature climbed higher and higher until it was just a faint shimmer against the sky. For a long time, Jack stood in silence. The outpost was quiet again. The bandits gone. The dragon gone. He was alone. He looked down at the alien device in his hand, now dull and lifeless. It had done its job. Cyrex had been more than a passenger, more than a burden. The dragon had been a mystery, a challenge, and in its own way, a companion. Now it was free, and Jax was left with a story no one would ever believe. He walked back to the truck, exhaustion finally catching up with him. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he cast one last glance at the sky. Whatever Cyrex's purpose had been, whatever it was meant to protect, Jax had played a part. Maybe a small one, maybe just a blip in the grand scheme of things. But it was enough. With a weary smile, he started the engine. The hover truck rumbled to life and Jack set off toward the horizon, the Martian dust billowing in his wake.